for today's session on circular taxation and circular procurement during the Circular European Days at Dubai Expo. I'm really honored to have you here, both those who managed to be with us today on site, but also those who are watching us online. I'm sure you have noticed something what I've seen actually yesterday, that during the previous session of the Circular Europe Days at Dubai Expo, the welcome speech is often limited to introducing the distinguished guests and then passing the floor to those distinguished guests. Today, we're not going to do that. Not that we don't have distinguished guests. The thing is, we want to show what we have done during our work at the leadership groups. We are aware that it may be a little bit vain, but we think that the thoughts we came up with during the work would be a good ground for further discussion. So now I give the floor to my co-moderator, Velle Labeau from Circular Procurement LG and Circular Flanders, who will introduce circular procurement instruments as drivers for circularity. Velle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Hubert. I don't see my screen yet. So I'm Velle Labeau from Circular Flanders, and together with my colleague Melody van den Akker, yes, thank you. We are chair of the leadership group on circular procurement, and we want to bring you an insight on what we are doing. So let me start with the linear economy. We are all aware that we are still in this linear economy. Many cities and regions and countries are investing in the recycling economy, but it's still a long way towards the circular economy. So a lot of steps have to be taken. The problem is that products are still not made and designed for disassembly or for repair. And circular business models are still not mainstream. So we have to do this together and in learning from each other towards this systemic change. This slide I saw in a study that was published last week, and it said that in the COP26, many cities and countries have promised to make their procurement more green. And it's important because what I learned here is that 7.5 billion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere is a responsibility of the public procurement of countries and regions and cities. So it's a huge amount. It's 15% of all greenhouse gases. So from that 7.5 billion, 70% is related to 6 industries. So what is also an important lesson is that it's not only a country or a government, but it's also many private stakeholders that are necessary to make this change. And also in the Circular Economy Action Plan of the European Commission, we see that procurement is one of the indicators to measure the progress. Are we in the good direction? How far are we? How fast are we going? But then you can say, okay, circular procurement, what is it and how can you do it? Well, the main message is just do it, start. And for a country or a city, it's important to make sure that your ambition is high, but not too high. It's important to choose your ambitions so that it's realistic. And here you see 5 possible ambitions and possible strategies to reach that ambition. For example, in your procurement proceedings, you can ask for or reach the extended life cycle, and you can ask for a longer guarantee, for example. Or you can ask your suppliers to make sure that they do also the maintenance or the reparations of the products. Well, then we come to the leadership group. That's also a group, a mixed group of network organizations, countries, cities, knowledge institutes. And the most important thing that we do is we connect the dots of all the existing initiatives, We look at the policy recommendations that those projects do or make, and we are looking how can we make this bigger, how can we upscale this, how can we bring them together to learn. These are some of the projects that we inventorized. And in all those initiatives, you see that there are tools, experiments, learning lessons, and policy recommendations. So it's important to bring those together and to start from that point and not restart over and over again. Another important project, because it's also working on the long scale version, and it's ProCirc. And ProCirc is working on experiments and looking in how to make sure that the impact is measured. How can we measure the CO2 reduction, the waste reduction, material use, and learn from that to give the policymakers some insights. But it's also working on the market and looking how to create a possibility for the market to learn. Another initiative that we did in our leadership group was giving input to the Sustainable Products Initiative to make sure that the view of the procuring officer is also in that project and not only the producer side. And then in November, we had a circular talk, and the topic was, could mandatory circular procurement drive the European Circular Economy Action Plan? And that is why, because an individual procuring officer now has the full responsibilities on his shoulder to decide which innovative proceeding they're using, to choose for circular products and services. And it's much easier if a government or a public authority helps this procuring officer in making some criteria mandatory. So the discussion was on this, and the discussion is also continuing on LinkedIn. So you're very welcome there. That was my small introduction to the leadership group. If you have any questions, please come to Melody or me.
Thank you very much, Verle. We also have a question and answer session at the end of today's event. Thank you very much. I'm sure that this interesting presentation, after this presentation, you have at least a basic idea what circular procurement can do for the circular transition and how can it be such a potent tool for this action. For most of you, this probably wasn't a surprise. The problem here is mostly not in the construction of the tool itself, but the application at scale. But for circular taxation, the problem is more severe, I would say. Typically, we are not aware of that we need changes in taxation, and they are considered something inherently bad. So we see that every modification that is coming through, that's probably something negative. And if I would ask you, when you see a newspaper title like modification to taxation system, and I guess that not many of you or none of you would ask, oh, at last we will have a modification to taxation, because we would think to ourselves that something bad is going to happen. It's going to be worse than it was before. So this makes my presentation on circular taxation and the need to make it happen even more vital. So let me jump straight into my presentation. Sorry for the short delay, but let's start. Okay. Okay, now it's working. Thank you very much. So when you think about the circular economy, we think about it as a basic instrument that enables us to achieve sustainability without having to diminish our quality of life. But when thinking about it, we are not really aware that we need to change the whole ecosystem of the economic model. So what do we mean by that? We need to change, of course, regulations. We need to change statistics, with, for example, having the main aim of GDP growth. We have to change procurement, what Verla already said a minute ago. And we have to change taxation. That's something I want to talk to you about today. The fact is that our inherited fiscal architecture, the taxation system, is geared towards linearity. What does it mean? What do I mean by that? I mean that there are many examples of having the taxation system support linearity instead of circularity. And this is, for example, purchasing a product without regards of the whole life cycle, taxing only the purchase of the product, so something that really is hard to implement circularity without having taken into account the whole life cycle of a product. Then having taxing also the retention of economic value. For example, value-added tax, as the name suggests, should tax only the new value added. So why then are we taxing second-hand products, for example? Then we are continuing the inherited tax collection mechanism that dictates the status quo that we already acquired, we already inherited some time ago. For example, labor taxes. Yeah, they were introduced because it was easier to collect those taxes, but now we stay with it. We're not changing it. We're not, forgoing labor taxes for pollution taxes, for resource taxes. It's not happening at the moment. And also more stark example that's giving subsidies for polluting activities, specifically to relieve consumers, to relieve the price pressure, etc. So yeah, so the current taxation system is geared towards linearity. And there were attempts to change it. Yeah? In European Union and also globally, we have introduced some environmental or green taxation, whatever they call it. But they have never managed to be like the quintessential part of the tax system. For example, in Europe, at the end of the millennium, they accounted for something more than 2.5% of GDP when the whole revenue of the public sector was around 1/3 of GDP of countries' GDP, and then it went down to historically low levels of 2020 when it accounted for a little bit more than 2% of GDP. So actually, the environmental taxes are, diminishing in terms of the whole economy, and they have never included the most in the most of the economy. They concentrated on specific areas like vehicles, transportation, like energy taxes. I mean, excise basically. So they have been just a patch on our taxation system that was made for linearity. So we have implemented environmental taxes, some kind of substitute of real change. They are just small steps in the right direction. That's right, but they don't make a meaningful change. We need something more powerful. We need something that is not only a patch on specific problem caused by linearity, but we need something greater. I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but before that, I would like to share some thoughts on the shortcomings of environmental taxation. And this is focusing specifically on one area, like vehicles, transportation, energy, and also taking into account only the one phase of the life cycle or product. Then there's the level of taxation, which, as I mentioned earlier on the diagram, is too low to offer to result in specific actions, specific changes to behavior of consumers, producers, to influence change of the production and consumption patterns. And then there's we often apply environmental taxation to goods and services that had no common alternatives, and that is petrol or cars. So we're not trying to reduce the use of those products because this was impossible without an alternative. We're just hiking the price there. So what we are offering instead, we are thinking in the economic incentive LG that we should be more ambitious. And what does it mean? We should change from the standard basic tax system to the circular tax system. We should think about how to incorporate circularity in the whole of the tax system, not to implement new environmental taxes as a patch to the standard architecture that was already there, but to make a new one. Of course, step by step, evolutionary. We're not trying to make it, put all the things on the head in one day. What does it mean? What does it mean to go from the standard tax system to the circular tax system? There's this one basic thing that is, the core of the gist of the idea, and this is how we treat the distortion caused by taxation and how we treat revenues from taxation. In the standard system, the first thought is, okay, how much revenues are the taxes gonna come to the public sector? So we are thinking about the level of taxation, the revenues, and if the public sector is gonna be fueled by those money coming in. And only secondly, we are thinking about distortion that the taxes are going to cause, but we are thinking let's limit those distortion because the economic mechanism have to work. If we're gonna influence them, then something bad's gonna happen. And we are actually proposing something different in the circular tax system, and that is, let's think about those distortion first, and let's think about them as something positive. So let's try to influence positive actions. Let's discourage negative ones. Let's use the taxation system to influence circular consumption, circular production. Let's make it happen. Let's make it a potent tool for making circularity a reality. And only then think about the revenues. So we're switching from putting revenues first to putting revenues second. I'm not saying we should not think about revenues. This is something that taxation was made for, right? And as I already said, circular taxation must be primarily aimed at modifying consumption patterns. What does it mean basically is that we have to promote activities that aim to retain the economic value of goods and services in time instead of opting for new products. We need to reinforce taxes on production factors that are linear in nature. We need to eliminate implicit costs for circular activities, implicit, explicit subsidies for polluting activities, which is kind of like crucial and a basic aspect of it. And at the end, I wanted to leave you with some thoughts, because one thought actually, because you might say that the things that I'm saying here is an utopia, but isn't circular economy also an utopia? When you think about it, for example, the Netherlands having a goal of being 100% circular in 2050, when the whole world is assessed as being circular on 8.6%, then this is kind of like impossible. But what they are saying is that let's aim high, let's put the bar as high as possible. So when we are not gonna get there, we actually tried as much as we could. So I'm saying let's do the same thing with taxation, and yeah, hopefully you will not be a utopia at the end, but our reality. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for my presentation of from Verle and from me on the leadership groups on economic taxation and also circular procurement. And actually now in our plans we had a meeting with MEP, member of the European Parliament, Paul Tang, but now in Strasbourg there's a discussion in the parliament, so he's not here with us now, but we have our second guest, Enrico De Giorgis from DG Environment, European Commission. Enrico, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, here I am. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Can we switch our schedule and put you first? Is it
No
okay?
problem. Sure.
Perfect.
No problem.
Let's do that. So the floor is yours, Enrico.
Thanks a lot. I'll try to open my presentation, which is going to help me. Can you, I hope you can see it on the screen. Let me just try to. Can you just confirm that you see on your screen my presentation, the first slide?
Yes, but there's this big black square that you need to minimize, maybe.
Okay,
oh, yeah,
I
now
hope
it's
now it's better. Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the invitation to participate today. I'm Enrico De Giorgis, working at the European Commission as a policy officer on green public procurement in the unit which is in charge of sustainable production, products and consumption. So the unit mainly dealing with the circular economy. Topics that would like to cover today. I would frame the GPP in the context of the European Green Deal, give you some information on the developments, especially on possible mandatory measures in sectoral legislation, and then give an overview of the European Commission GPP support tools that the European Commission has developed since many years. I'm talking about the green public procurement, which for me is a kind of a broader concept where circular procurement have, of course, its place, where circular procurement basically is the way of procuring with a particular attention to the aspects related to the durability of the products, the possibilities of reusing, of extending the lifetime of a certain product, repairing the product, including recycled content. So just to try to make this little point on why I'm talking about green public procurement and how this relates to circular. You all probably know among the priorities of the current European Commission, so for the period 2019-2024, there has been the European Green Deal, which took the form of a communication at the end of 2019. And the role of GPP in it is defined here. So public authorities, including the EU institutions, should lead by example and ensure that their procurement is green. The Commission will propose further legislation and guidance on green public purchasing. Then, as one of the many pieces of the implementation of the European Green Deal strategy, in March 2020, the Commission adopted a new circular economy action plan, And in the Circular Economy Action Plan, the Commission envisaged to propose minimum mandatory green public procurement criteria and targets in sectoral legislation, and phase in compulsory reporting to monitor the uptake of GPP. Beside this, the Commission will continue to support capacity buildings through guidance, training, dissemination of good practices. So, in the Circular Economy Action Plan from March 2020, one of the main actions is the definition of a sustainable products initiative that is going to take place through the revision of the Eco-Design Directive to go beyond only energy-related products, which is currently the case, so to extend all the circularity aspects in the Eco-Design Directive. And the idea is to assess whether it would be possible, and in which cases it would make sense, to, as part of this broader picture, to also include some mandatory requirements related to green public procurement. There are other initiatives ongoing. The work is ongoing on the Sustainable Products Initiative. The aim is to have something published by the first quarter of this year. So colleagues are working very intensively on this. Other initiatives that as a link with green public procurement or the revision of the consumer law, the establishment of a new right to repair, and a legislative proposal to ensure that companies substantiate their green claims using the environmental footprint methods. The Sustainable Product Initiative, Sustainable Product Policy Framework, I mean the same thing, focuses on certain key product value chain. So electronics and ICT are mentioned, batteries and vehicles, packaging, plastics, textiles, construction, and buildings. So this is a very quick overview of the recent EU GPP policy development. On one side, the Commission aimed to continue to support the voluntary GPP policy through guidance, training, as I said. But in the coming years, the idea is to strengthen the work on mandatory use of green public procurement criteria in sectoral legislation. The initiative of possible relevance, some I already mentioned batteries, so the new batteries regulation. The Commission adopted a proposal for the new regulation in December 2020, where an article is included on mandatory GPP. The revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive, adopted proposal of the Commission adopted in July 2021, the Sustainable Products Initiative I mentioned, and also the new legislative framework for sustainable food system and the revision of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. But now let's go back a little step. So I started with this update on what is going on, especially on the upcoming future mandatory measures for GPP, but why working on GPP and why public procurement is seen as so important to drive the transition to a more circular economy in the EU. Of course, this is a figure that is always quoted. We are talking about a huge amount of money, 14% of the EU gross domestic product, so 1.8 trillion euro per year. Figures are not so easy to be found, so these have to be taken a bit. But I mean, it's clear that this is a huge amount of money. An increase in environmental requirements in the use of this money can lead to environmental benefits, but not only. Also from an economic point of view, an increasing of the uptake of green technologies and products will lead to supporting innovation. So there are several benefits. From a political point of view, achieving environmental obligations, showing commitment to environmental protection and sustainable consumption and production. So of course, it's for contracting authorities to also show their coherence in their activities, not only in setting maybe obligation for citizens, for companies, but also showing the way, leading the way themselves. From a social point of view, the effects could be of improving health and well-being. So these are some of the benefits. It was very interesting to see what Berle presented in one of her slides. Here in this slide, I found some example from member states who started assessing the impacts related to public procurement in their countries. So the first example is from Finland, where, without going to the details of all the graphs that I copy-paste here, but around 34% of the carbon footprint in Finland, according to these studies, is related to public procurement. Something similar has been done in Denmark. Here we don't have the percentage, but there are the total overall values. So we see 12 million tons of CO2 equivalent can be or related in Denmark to public procurement. So again, just to show how big is what we are talking about when we talk about public procurement. There are, of course, some obstacles to GPP. Green products are perceived to cost more. There are sometimes legal uncertainties about green criteria, what it is possible to ask under the current public procurement legal framework. It is not always easy to understand how to verify green criteria. There is a lack of awareness of the benefits of green products. And also the public procurers are not used to deal also with green requirements. So it is needed to professionalize, also in this sense, the workforce. And sometimes there is a lack of political support. And these are the areas in which the Commission has come in the past years and is continuing working to provide some support. Here in this slide, there is an overview of the different tools that the Commission has developed in the years. A full set of EU GPP criteria is available, covering around 20 product groups. They are available in the languages of the EU. Then the Commission has published a handbook to try to clarify under the current legal framework what is possible to require in terms of environmental criteria. There are some tools to training in the area of GPP. There is a specific small publication on circular procurement, and then there is a big database with around 200 now examples. Examples are frequently seen by procurers are very effective because it's sometimes much easier to see, okay, someone else has already done it, so I can do it as well. And then we try to share news, information, and upcoming events. There is also a GPP help desk that can be contacted for questions more on the policy side related to public procurement, green public procurement, and regular newsletter. Without going to the details, then I'm happy to reply to questions. Common EU GPP criteria are a tool that was developed just to make sure that the work wasn't done several times at the EU level, then at member states level. So the aim was to have a thorough scientific research to define some criteria that could be applicable in all the EU. As I said, that they are covering 20 product groups right now. We'll see which are these product groups. Here it is. So the most important product groups are covered for public procurement, and more in the development of these EU GPP criteria, the aspects related to circularity are included and are becoming more and more important. So for instance, some products like computers, monitors, all the IT sectors is covered, with also data centers, which are on the next slide. Then the area of transport with road transport, but also furniture, buildings, food and catering services are covered, textiles. And these are the remaining product groups covered, with road lighting and traffic signals, for instance, imaging equipment, road design, construction, maintenance. So you see product groups where it is really possible to include many requirements related to circularity. And it is the process to define and revise EU GPP criteria is open to everyone, and it is currently ongoing, the revision of the criteria for buildings. So if anyone in the audience is interested to be involved in the process, here there is the email where they could write and ask to be registered as part of the stakeholder group working on this revision. This is what I mentioned, the Buying Green Handbook. So on how environmental considerations can be included at each stage of the procurement process in the current EU legal framework. And other tools are what I mentioned, the GPP good practice. So I really encourage you, if you're interested, to check these database, if you need to know a bit, maybe what examples in the buildings area, in whatever product group you're interested in. There you will find an explanation and an explanation of the examples, and also the contacts from the contracting authority who worked on this. And then to conclude, the last tools that have been developed are some tools to help also consideration related to life cycle costing, in particular for products where the energy consumption in the use phase is still the most relevant environmental impact. So tools have been developed and are available online. Here there is a link to the website for computers and monitors, for indoor lighting, for outdoor lighting, imaging equipment, and machines. This is and again, I mentioned the materials to help training contracting authorities, public buyers on GPP. There is a GPP training toolkit, which is composed of different modules on an introduction, on strategic aspects, legal aspects, one specific module on the needs assessment, one on aspects related to circular procurement, how to engage with the market, and then there are several operational modules addressing the different product groups for key sectors for GPP. So this is a bit an overview of how the Commission is working on circular procurement, green procurement. Thank you. And of course, I'm happy to reply to any questions if there are.
Thank you very much, Enrico. We'll have some questions after some time. Actually, probably after MEP Paul Tang is going to present, because despite the busy schedule, he's already with us. Mr. Tang, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry for being late. It's a bit hectic. We're in the middle of the plenary session, but I'm happy to join. Thank you for accommodating.
Yeah, but thank you for being here today with Day, and I give the floor to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Like I said, I'm happy to participate because this is a very interesting time. At the last half year, the European Union has cemented its role as global leader in the fight against climate change. Of course, the Glasgow Summit, but also the adoption of the EU climate law, the introduction of an important legislative package called Fit for 55, and they all show that Europe is serious about sustainability. And let's face it, it's high time. The warmest 7 years on record were the last 7 years. And last summer, we saw floods and fires hit Europe at a previously unheard scale. The climate crisis is already here and is here to stay. And for politics, there is the daunting task to massively change consumer choices and production patterns while protecting the well-being of everyone, and especially the least well-off. And our action should be based on 3 principles. First of all, make polluters pay. That's quite a common principle, at least in the European thinking. But I would like to add to that, act global and think social. Let me start by going to the first principle, make polluters pay. To limit the damage of climate change, pricing is key. Price incentives induce behavioral changes with consumers and producers and shift us from a linear, waste-driven economy to a circular model. And the polluter pay principle is a fundament of EU climate action and a fundament it seeks to export around the world. Through the revision of the emissions trading system and the revision of the energy tax directive, the EU has taken the lead in setting a price on emission. And the introduction of a carbon border adjustment mechanism is a way to encourage others to tax pollution as well. It encourages to form in this world a group of countries, a climate club of countries that price CO2 emissions. And indeed, the message is charge your polluters, or we will charge them, but see it as a cooperative mechanism. We want to form a climate club. And of course, CO2 is not the only thing polluting our planet and standing in the way of a circular economy. Indeed, the polluter pays principle should be extended where possible. For example, extended to other causes of air pollution, like nitrogen oxide, to jet fuel or road traffic, to landfill and incineration, and possibly more. There are ample opportunities for better pricing. And to give a recent example, the EU's plastic levy is a good starting point, although it's obviously still limited in scope. And indeed, there's no doubt that legal standards are also necessary to diminish and eradicate pollutions, for example, to make it easier to repair electronics. However, pricing and standards become more effective with cross-border international coordination. Act global. And act global should just be the second principle in our actions. Indeed, research shows that so far it's mostly households who pay the price of their emissions. And there's a research by the Institute of European Environmental Policy, which I thought was very clearly illustrating the problem. The Institute managed to put a rather shocking number to it. They found that households have internalized, that's a term used by economists, they have internalized a full 120% of the external cost of their air pollution. That means that they are charged more than the damage they do to the environment. This was for the case of air pollution, to be clear. Industry, on the other hand, households 127%, more than 100%. Industry, on the other hand, only has to pay 20% of the damages they bring. Transport 24%, and agriculture is even worse. Agriculture is only 6%. And this shows the need for European and international coordination, because in its absence, national governments tend to shift the burden on the least mobile, and thus on the households, and sometimes on those households that can least afford it. And of course, this is socially not sustainable. Indeed, the shift towards the least mobile factor may and will backfire. At the Yellow Vests roaming the streets of Paris and protesting against the price increases has provided a clear warning signal for this, and they are still being heard in Europe, fortunately. Increasing the price of pollution alone will not set us on the right path. To promote a circular business model, we should reduce the cost of the most important ingredient of recycled goods, and that is labor. There's an tax report led by Femke Groothuis, who creates a roadmap for building a circular tax system. by using the revenue from increased taxes on resources to reduce the burden on labor. It's a shift in the tax burden. We can reduce the emissions while limiting the distributional effects on households. And these findings are echoed by the US Federal Reserve and the French Conseil d'Analyse Économique. If we take the income from green taxes to pay a carbon dividend to citizens, we can increase after income tax for all with a below average income. Carbon dividends can dampen the short-term shocks to people's wallets and stimulate the economy. Taxation and the redistribution of the revenues of taxations are thus key to protect the well-being of the least well-off. And the EU social funds financed from the revenues from the ETS, the emission trade system, is a step in this direction. For success, however, it is key that national governments extend this thinking and use the increases in income from ETS and CBAM to help ease the transition for all. And for if we have seen one thing over the past few years, is that the transition has to be inclusive or else she fails. Therefore, think social should be our third principle. We need equity to be efficient in our fight against climate change. One could say social is at the core of sustainability. Redistributing the income from green taxes alone is not enough, in my opinion. To reshape our entire economy and make production processes carbon neutral, we need significant investments too, significant public investments. And with revenue for carbon pricing ideally going back to citizens, governments should cast a wide net in their search for additional resources. And our economies undergo a wide range of restructuring. Our fiscal rules should do too. And here I'm talking about the tax systems in the member states, in the countries, and the EU rules, the budgetary rules governing public spending. Tax avoidance costs us billions and billions each year. Wealth generates income that is widely undertaxed compared to income from labor. And these imbalances are generating the inequality, are at the source of the climate skepticism. Addressing them shows we're all in this transition together and will provide needed funds for public investments in infrastructures and new technologies. EU action against tax avoidance is still at its infancy. It's developing, it's growing quickly, and we need the governments to throw their weight behind it to take the decisive action that can free up significant resources for the EU as a whole. And the ongoing debate on the reform of EU's fiscal rules, the budgetary framework, also provides an opportunity to speed up the transition of a circular economy. For excluding green investments from the rules on the public deficit and public debt would enable governments to invest in a resource-neutral economy. We need the fiscal rules, the budgetary framework, to adapt to these times, and these times require investment in sustainability and circularity. Governments thus have a wide set of policies at their disposal. With EU-level action, they can finally make the polluters pay, and especially those polluters pay that have so far escaped the dance and can set standards to counter the waste-driven economies. They should be complemented with national measures to lessen the burden on the least well-off and to bring the domestic tax system in line with the sustainable economy. Of course, not all EU policies are easy to implement. Changing taxes at the EU level requires unanimity, and member states are, unfortunately, quick to block initiatives that may harm their short-term national interests. Similarly, coordinating national policies has long proven a challenge, yet the payoffs of mutually reinforcing national reforms are actually quite big. Where legislation is temporarily out of reach, other forms of EU influence can stimulate action. Think of the next generation EU funds to incentivize reform and the European semester to coordinate it. In addition, future EU funds to finance the transition will only increase the EU's ability to coordinate and incentivize national reforms. EU solutions are thus within reach, and the political momentum for these reforms are strong. Of course, the pushback on some of these measures is sometimes also strong. No one likes the EU charge, like to see the EU charge polluting companies through CBAM or impose standards that end up with a global reach. But the stick of the EU's global climate action comes with a carrot too. We try out policies and share those that work. With the 3 principles to make polluters pay, think global, and act social, we pave the way for other economies to follow. The strong belief that its actions have global benefits allows the EU to take a tough stance when needed. We are serious about sustainability, and we are not afraid to show it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your very interesting and, I must say, ambitious words, how our future of taxation could look like in Europe. If we could hold you for a few minutes, then probably we can reschedule our plan and make the question and answer session now, if that's possible. Yeah? Okay, let's do that, because we have Enrico also online and Verle, and we'll just talk at first maybe about the combination of circular procurement and circular taxation, because we have already seen from your presentations that the circular procurement is kind of developed, I would say. There is lots of things going on, lots of materials for people to use, for the public sector to use also. But the circular taxation is kind of just taking off, I would say. The circular carbon border pricing mechanism, other aspects are only, I would say, a drop in the sea, in my opinion, at least. You know, they're not taking whole of the markets, whole of the economy into consideration, but only on the specific area. What is the future of taxation in Europe? How would you say, how can it, live up to the expectations of attaining circularity, 100% circularity, maybe soon in 30 or 50 years? Is that possible with the current tax system? Paul, maybe you go first.
Well, what we see is that the current focus is still very much on CO2 emissions, we now see that the prices of CO2 on the ETS market is indeed growing, and that's and I've been waiting for that for a long time, right? So with the focus also come the policy actions and also comes the pricing. That's how I like to see it. But okay, I'm a politician, so I'm optimistic by nature, because otherwise I can't be a politician. So but I'm inclined to think that now we have started very much to focus on climate change and therefore on CO2 emissions, and that works. I agree with you that is not enough to arrive at a circular economy, right? That we need to do more to arrive at this, and this is why I emphasize that we need to extend the polluters pay principle to include other forms of pollution or to promote recycling. I agree with you on that. Yet I also think that now that we are formulated a coordinated action, this will also on CO2 emissions, most notably, this will also pave the way for other coordinated actions. So we are building, and say, the institutions and the infrastructure to arrive at that. In that sense, I think, so I agree with you that it's not enough at this stage, but I'm hopeful that it will develop in the future also, because we make already some positive actions, and this will only help to show what we can do if we focus on it.
Thank you very much. And the take on circular procurement from Enrico or Verle, have it already shown to be effective in the circular transition, or do you need some more ambitious activities from the EU or from member countries, from other parties involved?
Well, I'm not an expert on public procurement, but seeing the
because this was
no.
The question to Enrico.
Oh, sorry, to Enrico. No, okay.
Yeah.
Can I think, now I just still have the floor. I saw the presentation on public procurement. I think it's very helpful in developing a market for circular, that are part of circular economy. I also think we should even also in this case sometimes not just look at taxation but also at standards, making sure that products can be repaired and are indeed recycled. I think it's not an either or approach. We need a massive approach, so to say, to arrive at that.
Okay, so thanks a lot. So I will start, and then Verle may want to complement on the circular procurement side. Of course, the two things are very strictly related. I mean, it will be great to have a taxation system that also will made for public authorities green and circular products and services cheaper. So that would be great, of course. And from the circular procurement point of view, I think there is, as you said, a lot of attention, a lot of movement now in the latest times, but still many things still have to be done. So all things that I mentioned as work in the mandatory field, in the definition of mandatory requirements, are still at the stage of commission proposal, when we are already there, or we are not even there. For instance, what I mentioned in the food area for the sustainable framework for sustainable food. So a lot to be done still, and we know that around the EU, the situations in where contracting authorities, member states are, the level of implementation of green and circular procurement might be very different. We know that there are some contracting authorities, some regions, some member states already quite advanced, but still a large majority that needs to really start. And that's why it's also so important to share good examples. And that's why also after several years of voluntary policy, I think a decision has been taken to move towards more mandatory requirements.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
Verle. Do you have something to add?
Well, just to add that the time frame now with many products and materials and resources becoming scarce, you see that for procurers, they are infected for the first time. I think when you want to build or a construction or something, you have a problem of products and materials. So the climate is really good now to start with circular procurement, but the problem is that there are some bottlenecks, like taxation, for example, mainly on labor instead of on products, but also on legislation, for example, in reuse and the second-hand products that have a taxation 2 times, for example. So I think it's really cooperation between public and private, and also on the different policy domains. So beyond the silos, I think, is it really important to look.
So you once again mentioned labor taxation and how to, you can switch to resource and pollution taxation here. And I've noticed, Mr. Dang, that you have to leave in a minute, but I wanted to ask you last short question, actually, because we all know that the European regulators cannot influence taxation systems directly in member states. But if there was such a possibility, what would be your first step on, implementing taxation in such a way to influence circularity in EU? What would you think of?
I think you're right. It's not easy to find European decisions on taxation. So the first thing I would change is to go to majority voting on. We now have policy that is based on consensus, requiring every member state to agree. I think we have a common European and even global issue to deal with, and that would very much require indeed majority voting. So that would be the first thing I had to do. It's an institutional matter, but an important one. once we have arrived at this institutional change, probably the first that comes to mind is the tax on kerosene. I've been fighting for that, I think, since I was still in national politics. It's long overdue, and but like I said, there are more examples. For example, the way we deal with waste, allowing still landfill and incineration. I think that should change too, and I think taxes can be helpful there. But I also see that, for example, road pricing as a very promising way forward. So I think there are good options on the table. I mentioned the X-Tax report that really studies these and takes a sort of realistic approach of what is desirable and what is doable. And I think that's what we need. In the end, you need a combination of taxation, taxes, standards, and legislation to get it done, but it's certainly doable. But these are some things that come to mind when we would shift to majority voting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Being with us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
There's a question from the audience, if you can wait a minute.
Thank you. Just a very short question, because I think actually this panel is extremely interesting because it touches upon several points which are crucial for this the change over to circular economy. It was mentioned the issue of taxation, and we understand in Europe with a bit of a challenge, of course, to change tax rules, because it was mentioned that there's a need for unanimity. So on taxation specifically, my question would be, are there examples outside the European Union, if you are aware of, for instance, where, as you mentioned, there is no VAT on second-hand goods? Because this clearly would be a very strong step to facilitate circularity, because indeed it doesn't make sense that we tax twice products. So concretely, if there is an example of other country that does this. And second point, regarding public procurement, as you mentioned, is 14% of EU GDP. Now, could we envisage a situation in which the EU, so the money which is distributed, for instance, through structural funds by the European Union, are distributed according to more stringent rules of, for instance, binding green procurement? So, for instance, including specific conditions, and then asking the authorities, regional authorities, for instance, who are then using the funds to also abide by those principles, and like this move towards a wider implementation of more stringent green procurement rules. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for the interesting question. Maybe I'll answer the first one, because I'm the one here from the LG on economic incentives, also circular taxation. And the answer was going to be fast, because I have no knowledge of such country that doesn't tax second-hand goods. There are examples of countries that don't tax services that are connected with the retention of value of second-hand goods, like mending clothes, shoes, other this kind of stuff. And this is possible in EU, and it happens, for example, in Sweden. So there are such examples, but no direct examples of exempting VAT from second-hand goods, as I know, actually. And now heading to the question, the second part of the question on circular procurement, going to Enrico and Vella.
I can start again on this question. Thanks for the question. Of course, this is something of high interest, considering the amount of money that is being spent through programs, finance support by the EU. This is done to a certain extent. For instance, for what I know, I have not followed very closely the discussion, but under the current recovery and resilient funds, there are some limits, some measures that have to be followed and respected on how the money coming through the recovery and resilience fund are being spent. Of course, then there is always a negotiation with member states, with the authorities in charge of managing the money, to find an agreement on the level of circularity, which is something that I followed a bit more closely, for instance, in the area of cohesion funds, so for regional developments, And of course, we have tried to push as Commission as much as possible for this to happen. But again, this is something that has to be agreed with the member states. So it's then the result is always the result of a negotiation at EU level with member states. So that's why also at member state level is really needed to have a political will to support and to move on with circularity and circular procurement.
I just want to add perhaps that it's always a difficult exercise between more rules and to get to the result that you want. One example, for example, if you describe exactly what products are allowed because they are circular, for example, then you also make some other products, new innovative products or reused products besides those procurement proceedings. So that's also a risk in defining too much what you need as a circular product or service. But one other element is, for example, in those projects, a small change could be that reused products are also allowed to bring in, for example, in the costs. For the moment, that's not possible. Only if you need a computer, for example, in those projects, you need to buy a new one. So those elements, I think, are small steps, but also to learn and to make sure that public authorities become the example for others to learn.
Yes, that's really, really important, I would say, because, you know, we are all claiming to head for circularity, and also the public sector being the leader in leading the way to circular economy transition. But then again, does it put the money where the mouth is? I'm not sure about it. What's your take on this? Probably maybe on the EU level, yes, but the member states not so much. But if you have different opinions on this one, then please share them with us.
Perhaps I think that the intention is always good, but between the intention and effective the result, there's different strategies that you can take, and it's not so easy. Circularity is a complex topic, so you have to see what aspects are important for this project or for that country policy, or so it's always a big exercise to make sure that you make the right decisions.
Enrico, any take on that, or?
No, nothing really to add from my side. No.
Okay, then thank you for the discussion, and now I'd like to invite you to the last part of our session. This is the examples of circular procurement and also some messages from the LG on economic incentives head, and also Femke Groy, who was so much introduced by MEP Paul Tang. So please stay with us for this one. And for now, I thank you with the discussion. And we're gonna show those showcases in a moment. Thank you.
Circulair aankopen is een belangrijke hefboom voor de overgang naar een circulaire economie. Een circulaire economie streeft ernaar om producten, componenten en materialen zo lang mogelijk hoogwaardig te blijven gebruiken, door ze te herstellen, te upgraden of uit elkaar te halen en om te vormen tot nieuwe producten. De materialen die we kiezen zijn bij de aanvang van ons aankoopproject deels gerecycleerd of hernieuwbaar en bij het levenseinde herbruikbaar, recycleerbaar of afbreekbaar. Circulair aankopen is een nieuwe manier van aankopen voor overheden en bedrijven, met oog voor mens, planeet en met opportuniteiten voor kostenreductie. We onderscheiden 5 verschillende circulaire aankoopambities. Minder kopen, minder materialen gebruiken. De nieuwe en niet hernieuwbare materialen beperken. De gebruiksduur van je producten verlengen. Het hergebruik van het product of onderdeel voorzien en maximaliseren. Het recyclagepotentieel van de gebruikte materialen meenemen in je keuze. In deze film gaan we in op de ambitie om de totale hoeveelheid materialen te beperken. Dat kan door minder aan te kopen en meer intern of extern te delen. Door bestaande materialen te hergebruiken of te refurbishen, maar ook door in de productie gewoonweg minder materialen te gebruiken en productieafval te vermijden of te hergebruiken. In Vlaanderen hebben al tal van bedrijven en organisaties deze aankoopstrategie toegepast of gefaciliteerd. Een voorbeeld van facilitatie is Werflink.
Werflink is een online deelplatform tussen aannemers onderling, waarbij overschotten van werven met elkaar gedeeld kunnen worden, zowel overschotten van bestaande werven als nieuwe werven waar bepaalde zaken toch blijven liggen en die men onderling kan delen. Stockageruimte kan ook gedeeld worden, daarnaast ook machines die blijven stilstaan. Op die manier wordt toch ingegrepen op een aantal zaken die het milieu kunnen bevorderen, zoals transportkosten verminderen, maar ook het produceren van telkens nieuwe materialen die nu kunnen hergebruikt worden.
Bij Accenture werd het nieuwe gebouw ingericht door 60% oude meubelen te hergebruiken.
Wel, ons doel was om onze oude meubels zoveel mogelijk te hergebruiken. Dus we hebben eerst gekeken welk deel we zo konden meenemen naar het nieuwe kantoor. En dan hebben we gekeken naar welke meubels kunnen herstyled worden voor het nieuwe design. En de rest van de meubels die overgebleven zijn, hebben we aangeboden aan onze werknemers en partnerorganisaties om te kopen.
Voor zijn circulaire inrichting maakte het facilitair bedrijf een raamovereenkomst op.
Wij kozen resoluut voor hergebruik als eerste optie. Wij gaan voor minder nieuwe materialen en maximaal hergebruik van bestaand meubilair. Bij het facilitair bedrijf brengen we al het overtollig materiaal van de Vlaamse overheid in kaart en wij geven het een tweede leven.
Het beperken van de totale hoeveelheid materialen kan ook gerealiseerd worden door een slim design. Dat is wat Colruyt Groep doet.
Bij Colruyt Groep kiezen we bij de technieken voor plug-and-play systemen, die makkelijk monteerbaar, demonteerbaar en aanpasbaar zijn. Om een 12 jaar verbouwen wij onze winkels, waarbij we maximaal inzetten op hergebruik van materialen. Hierbij kijken we ook naar een slim ontwerp, zodanig hergebruik een logische keuze wordt.
This was the video from the region of Flanders, and now some specific showcases from the city of Leuven, from the same region.
For the city of Leuven, a university city in Belgium of 100,000 inhabitants, known for its historic heritage, health and high-tech sector, and its innovative approach in working towards a climate-neutral city by strong collaborative partnerships embodied by an organization called Leuven 2030. Becoming a circular city is part of the commitment and ambition to become a climate-neutral city. So let me tell you in a nutshell a few elements on how we work towards a circular Leuven. We set up processes to turn waste into resources, in this case hard plastics, collected by our waste management company, sorted out by employees of a social economy organization and turned into products like a park bench by a plastic recycler. As a municipality, we've now integrated circular principles in the tender for the next procurement of goods for the public domain. We try to keep building materials in circulation through the setup of a building material platform, a physical warehouse where building materials are temporarily kept in order to be reused by citizens and local organizations. As a municipality, we integrated urban mining in our internal procedures and workflows, and we integrated principles of reused building construction elements in tenders. After several years of pilot projects and learning by doing, we need to focus now on upscaling and impact. With support of ProCirc, we've set up a process to develop an action plan to integrate in a systemic way circularity in our procurement policy, and we chose to start by focusing on the construction projects and processes due to the impact of this sector on greenhouse gas emissions. The built environment is responsible for half of the total material used in Flanders, and an enormous amount of waste is produced annually in the construction and demolition sector. How did we get started? Accompanied by a Vlaanderen circulaire expert in circular procurement, we organized 2 workshops attended by professionals of all departments involved in procurement and construction-related processes. The first workshop mapped out the challenges and opportunities for circular procurement with a focus on construction projects. We worked towards a common understanding on circular construction and circular procurement by setting out 10 main principles. The second workshop looked at the legal, financial and procurement processes within the organization and looked for possible solutions to be able to scale up circular procurement to an increasing percentage of procurement budgets. With assistance from experts, all of this input was integrated in an overall action plan consisting of 16 action points built around 8 topics to be implemented the upcoming years. The 8 topics are policy, materials, procurement process, legislation, business case, market dialogue, budget, learning organization. This action plan, approved by the City Council, combines short-term actions to be implemented, long-lasting processes to be set up, and all of them using the lever of procurement as a driver of change for a circular city. The action plan is now integrated in our urban circular strategy, built around 5 strategic objectives, circular construction being one of them, and progress will be monitored. Thank you for the opportunity to share a glimpse of the story on how we work towards a climate neutral and circular Leuven. And if you want to know more, please do get in touch.
Thank you very much for watching the showcases on circular procurement. And now we're heading towards the end of the session. But before that, let's hear the messages at the end from Femke Groithus from X-Tax Project first, and then Emmanuel Katrakis, the head of the leadership group of on economic incentives from the stakeholder platform.
I'm the president and co-founder of the X-Tax Project. We're a think tank focused on the role of tax in achieving the circular economy. And with our knowledge partners, including tax experts of Deloitte, EY, KPMG and PwC, Cambridge Econometrics and business leaders, we focus on opportunities to shift the tax burden from labor to resource use and pollution. This year, we will publish the results of a study modeling the impacts of a tax shift in 27 member states of the EU. We're a proud member of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, the leadership group on economic incentives, and it's an honor to share some thoughts with you today. The EU Green Deal actually recognizes that changing tax systems is key to achieving a sustainable and inclusive circular economy. Tax systems are a massive financial force steering our economies, and most governments rely on labor taxes for a significant or a growing portion of their budgets. EU countries collect 5.6 trillion euros in taxes each year, and 52% of the tax revenues is derived from labor through income tax, payroll taxes, and social contributions. Only 6% of tax revenues comes from green or environmental taxes, and these should cover all uses of natural resources, including fuels, metals and minerals, plastics, water, carbon, and pollution. Now, labor taxes incentivize businesses to try and minimize labor input, even if it takes more energy and resources, because they are relatively tax-free and subsidized. In G20 countries, of the external cost of energy consumption, only 0.5% is passed on to producers. And since signing the Paris Climate Agreement, G20 governments have provided $3.3 trillion of direct support for fossil fuel power. Now note that the polluter pays is a key principle in the founding treaties of the European Union, but the polluter doesn't pay, the polluter gets paid. And this means that there's no level playing field for circular entrepreneurs. A circular and carbon neutral economy requires a steady but consistent overhaul of consumption patterns. Half of carbon emissions is linked to materials management, so the value of resources must be retained. And businesses are exploring and developing circular business models. IKEA has installed 1 million solar panels on its stores and has started selling renewable energy to households. Unilever is investing €1 billion to eliminate fossil fuels from cleaning products. And Zalando and Tommy Hilfiger have started selling pre-owned clothing. These activities, such as repair, recycling, reuse, refurbishment, redesign of supply chains and R&D, these are all labor-intensive activities or knowledge-intensive. They take more time, more attention, and innovative thinking. The energy transition is labor-intensive. Think of retrofitting older homes. And needless to say, that the world needs decent jobs. In the EU alone, 32 million people are in need of more employment. And in 2020, the world lost the equivalent of 255 million full-time jobs, according to the ILO. So by tapping into human potential, the circular economy is not just a sustainable, but also an inclusive solution. So how do we make sure that financial incentives in our tax systems are actually aligned with the goals of circularity and the SDGs? In our studies, we analyze the impacts of tax shift scenarios. So what happens if we start actually applying the polluter-based principles and use the revenues for social impact? This year, we looked at a broad-based scenario in the EU, including a reduction in income tax and social contributions, as well as income support for the lowest income groups. And for employers, there are various payroll tax credits included, for example, for new employment, for reskilling and retraining, for circular process innovation, for example. In the scenario, the necessary tax revenues are generated by introducing a kilometer charge, increasing VAT, taxing carbon emissions and other pollution caused by industries and aviation, shipping and agriculture. For example, there's also a higher price on water and waste and use of fossil fuels in chemical processes. The modeling results of such a scenario demonstrate that there could be higher economic growth, more jobs, and less pollution. It shows that a progressive impact with all households gaining in purchasing power. A tax shift from labor to resources improves the business case for companies, boosting innovation. And when this inclusive and sustainable option becomes one of the most profitable ones, then companies will be able to scale up precisely that part of their activities. Understanding the dynamics of tax in business decisions is key, and you're all invited to join our research. To gain insight in the opinions of entrepreneurs and managers, you could join the survey we've put online. You could follow the QR code that will be provided to you. Together, we can make taxes a lot smarter and turn tax from a barrier to an enabler of the circular economy. Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Thank you for the message, Femke. It was really inspiring, I would say, and let's hope that in a few years we're gonna see the shift from labor to pollution and resources happen. And now there's time for the video clip from Emmanuel Katrakis on economic incentives and our work at the leadership group of stakeholder platform.
My name is Emmanuel Katrakis. Hello, my name is Emmanuel Katrakis. I'm the Secretary General of EURIC, the European Recycling Confederation. I'm also the coordinator of the Leadership Group on Economic Incentive of ECESP, the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, which is a joint initiative of the European Economic and Social Committee and the European Commission, gathering frontrunners in circular economy. Now, moving towards a circular economy is an absolute must. With on one hand scarce resources, and on the other hand a global population which is ever increasing, a middle class which is due to exceed 5 billion people by 2030, a linear economy system which is mainstream today is simply a no-go. We cannot continue exceeding planetary boundaries, and we absolutely need to move towards a circular economy. Now, we are far from there. If we look at the 2021 edition of the Circular Economy Gap Report, its conclusion is basically that today the world is only 8.6% circular, which is even less than in 2020, and which means in very practical terms that these linear value chains would, if continue, bring us towards temperature increase, globally speaking, of 3 to 6%, which is extremely far away from the targets of 1.5% set by the Paris Agreement. So how can economic incentives help? One of the biggest problems today to move towards a circular economy is the fact that externalities, environmental externalities, are not priced by market prices. So to take a very practical example, today a consumer is not going to get any reward if he buys a mobile phone which is easier to repair, easier to recycle, which is using recycled materials instead of primary materials, and hence making a massive contribution in terms of CO2 savings and resource savings, than a mobile phone which is absolutely not repairable or recyclable, or which is only using primary materials and not recycled materials. At the end of the day, the prices will be exactly the same. And this is where economic incentives can help to make sure that more sustainable products or more sustainable services are basically rewarded, and that sustainable choices ultimately are the choices being made by consumers, public authorities, so forth and so on. So now there are very different types of economic incentives. We can speak about green taxation, for instance, where a lower VAT rate or no VAT can be basically placed on sustainable products or repairable products or repair services of products made of recycled materials, for instance. We can also think of a widespread incentives being used in many member states where, for instance, there is a higher taxation placed on, or gate fee placed on, the landfill of waste to level the playing field with the recycling of waste instead of disposal. We can also think of market-based incentives whereby, for instance, a carbon emission trading system is put in place to price basically carbon emissions which otherwise won't be factored in by market prices alone. Now, economic incentives are often and shall often be part of a much wider strategy with other type of instruments which can be either, again, economic incentives or somehow hybrid, but which are going to be used at the end of the day to support and render more attractive sustainable products and sustainable services. I'm going to take 3 examples. One which is basically green public procurement, whereby criteria are going to reward not only the best price or the best offer, but also going to factor in basically sustainable aspects of products or services that public authorities are going to procure. And green public procurement has a key role to play, especially for products and services which are bought in large quantities by public authorities and which actually are going to support the fact that public money is going to support the transition towards a circular economy, and actually then can play an important role in terms of driving economies of scale for sustainable products or services which would benefit from public procurement. Another one is EPR schemes, extended producer responsibility schemes, whereby the responsibility of the end-of-life product phase is basically shifted to, or partially shifted to, the producers, which are going to pay a fee to a scheme which is going at the end of the day to finance proper collection and recycling of products, often complex products, which otherwise would be very poorly managed when they reach end of life. So in Europe, we have a lot of extended producer responsibility schemes for product categories like, for instance, electronic waste or batteries or packaging, whereby basically producers are going to pay a fee to a particular scheme, which in return is going to support the proper collection and recycling of those product categories. Now, one of the game changer with EPR schemes is when fees are basically modulated, not only based on the volumes or the amount of products which are placed on the market and falling under that EPR scheme, but also based on sustainability criteria, for instance, how repairable, how reusable, how recyclable, how a product is using recycled content, whereby the most sustainable products placed on the market would have to bear a much lower fee than the least sustainable product. And this modulation of fees, which is now entering into force, is absolutely essential in connecting the dots between, on one hand, the design phase and the end-of-life phase. The last, basically, not an incentive, but measure, which is a game changer, are binding recycled content targets. At European level, we do have now binding recycled content targets for PET in plastic in plastic bottles, and we'll certainly have more recycled content targets in other for other materials in other product categories. But what we saw for plastic bottles is that it played a key role in driving the demand for recycled PET, decorrelating recycled PET prices from oil prices, and basically sending a long-term signal to all the players along the value chains to invest in proper collection, proper recycling, and use of recycled materials back into products. So I wanted to make a very short introduction about economic incentive, show that they should also work with a set of other policy measures to be efficient, and pass on the message that moving towards a circular economy is a global endeavor, it's a collecting endeavor, and it's absolutely essential to work together. So stay tuned, go on the website of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform to stay informed, and we look forward to continue working with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is actually the end of today's session, and I would like to thank our presenters, our distinguished guests, but also the ones who are watching here in Dubai and in front of the computers. And I leave you with the last message that we actually have to make whatever it takes to attain circularity, and this means also changing the rules that our economy is based on. That's procurement, that's circular taxes, that taxation system, other regulations, and we should be ambitious with our goals. And I think that in a few years, maybe we'll see the circularity transition happen. Thank you very much for today. Thank you.